Hey guys, welcome to a new module, and in this module I want to introduce a concept called Object Oriented Programming System, which we also call as OOPS, based on which languages like C++, Java, Python are created. So in this lecture we are going to talk about some fundamental concepts of OOPS, while in the further lectures we will be dive deep with each concept. The language like C, Pascal, these are called as procedure-oriented programming language. Since in these language, a programmer use procedure or a function to perform a task. While developing software, the main task is divided into several subtasks, and each subtask is represented as a procedure or a function. So the main task is composed of several functions. This approach is called as procedure-oriented approach. And if you look at this particular figure, you will totally understand how this particular task is now divided into several subtasks, which is okay to follow for small programs. But when we jump onto big programs, big problems, big system, big softwares, this concept cannot be used. Since the main aim of the programming is to get a solution along with the habit to use minimum lines of code to make our code reusable. Whenever we try to expand a software, it should be in a manner that we can reuse our old codes. Because of this, languages like C++, Java, Python use classes and objects in their program. That is the reason we call it as object-oriented programming language. So if I want to explain you about class is something like a blueprint or a structure. An object is like a member of class which follows the same structure. The basic example if I want to take is car. So we can take car as our class. Car has different attribute, maybe a company name, maybe its wheel, maybe its engine, maybe its name, maybe color, model number, and lot more thing. So car is our class and these are different attributes. Now if I create an object of a car, that means this particular class, I can create a Honda. This is my object. Now the color can be blue, its wheel can be some alloy wheel, it might be using an engine maybe MT1278, the seat number can be something like 5 and it might have some different feature for AC, for safety purpose. So this is an object. Now I can create a second object also. Following the same structure of a car, I can create a Ford, I can create a Mercedes. So what we are doing here is I am just using a structure, and following that structure I can create multiple objects and all these objects will follow similar structure. Now these objects can have their own feature. I hope you got some basic idea about class. So in simple manner, class is just a structure and object are member of class which follows that particular structure. So we take car as an example and all the different type of cars are its object. The one thing that come into my mind is why we are using these object-oriented programming language. Why we are not following procedure-oriented approach. In POP approach, the programmer concentrate on a specific task and write a set of functions to achieve it. When there is another task to be added to that particular software that is on which we are working, he would be writing another set of function. This means the concentration will be only to achieve that particular task, write more function just to achieve the task. So the concentration of a programmer is not towards reusing old codes to reduce the lines of code, and following the same structure, a new task every time requires developing the code from the scratch. This wastes programmer time and effort. In POP approach, every task and subtask is represented as function. That means we cannot set a structure. Hence, whenever we are going to work on some big software, maybe some 10,000 or 20,000 or 1 lakh line of code, it is going to give a lot of effort to check out bugs, to debug our softwares, and in future if we want to add more feature, it is going to be complicated. So this was one of the main reason why people don't follow POP approach. Now before ending this lecture, let us talk about some features of OOPS, that is Object Oriented Programming System. So the first thing is class and object. I hope by now you understand that class help us to give a structure to our code and object is basically help us to add members following the same structure. We'll be talking about all these points. All these points are equals to complete one lecture. So we will be talking about them. Also, we will be following their examples. The second point is encapsulation. So it is a mechanism where data, that is our variables, and the code, that is our different function, our method that involve in this particular program will be binded together. For example, if we take a class, we write a particular variable and we write different type of function, that is method inside that particular class. So the class is binding both variables and function together. This point might not be clear because encapsulation can only be understood once you clear about your class and objects. So we'll be doing that, don't worry. Next feature is abstraction. There may be a lot of data a class contains and the user does not need the entire data. The user requires only some part of the available data. In that case, we can hide the unnecessary data from the user and expose only the data that is actually used by the user. A good example for abstraction is a car. Any car which has some part like engine, radiator, battery, maybe some mechanical equipments. So the user of the car, that is the driver, should know how to drive the car and does not require any knowledge of any part. So he might not know about how engine works, what is the flow of the engine, what is different type of parts that are involved in that engine. So the driver is never bothered about how the engine is designed, its internal part or anything about the engine. All he should know is how to drive the car. This is why the car manufacturer hide these type of parts, and driver has its own panel with a steer wheel and all the control buttons that are useful, and all the other parts are hidden. This is the basic thing about abstraction. So user should be only exposed to the data which is useful. Next feature is inheritance. So this is one of the most important feature. So for example, whenever we try to extend any program, whenever we try to add new features to any program, we might need to get features of our old program, or we might need to use some old codes. With the help of inheritance, what we can do is we can take all the important things from our previous class, that is from our previous code, and then can reuse them. For example, you and me, we acquire some important qualities from our parents. So that is a good example of inheritance. We might have A class, we might have B class, we might have C class. So A class might be your grandparents, B class might be your parents, and C class might be you. So what your parents did is they acquired some important qualities from your grandparents. Now you acquired qualities from your parents. So that's how things follows with class also. And the last feature that I want to talk about is polymorphism. So the word polymorphism came from two Greek words, that is poly, that means many, and morphos, that means form. So polymorphism represents the ability to assure several different forms. So in programming, if I give you a basic example, whenever you try to take two variables and we try to print them together, if I take two variables as integer and if I try to print them, it will perform as addition. While if I take two strings and try to print them, it will work as concatenation. So this is one good example of polymorphism. The ability to perform differently at different situation is most important. So these are the feature of OOPS. I know this is one of the most confusing thing at this point of time because we need to talk about them in depth. We need to understand class and object, perform some examples. I hope this lecture was useful for you. So in the next lecture, we will be diving deep with classes and object.